The final confrontation begins as Kong reaches the top of the Empire State Building with Ann, creating one of the most unforgettable moments of the entire story. After everything he has experienced, Kong finally finds a place where he can briefly escape the streets and crowds below. Standing high above New York, he appears almost peaceful for the first time since being brought to civilization. The enormous city stretches around him, but Kong's attention remains focused on Ann. For him, she is more important than the thousands of people and buildings surrounding them. Ann understands that this moment may not last. She can see the aircraft approaching in the distance, and she knows that the military will not stop simply because Kong has found a temporary place of safety. The emotional strength of the scene comes from the contrast between beauty and tragedy. The sunrise creates a calm atmosphere, while the audience knows that Kong's enemies are approaching. Kong watches the sky with curiosity and determination, almost as if he does not fully understand the danger represented by the aircraft. His world has always been controlled by physical creatures and natural forces. He has never faced machines capable of attacking him from the sky. Ann tries to remain close to him, knowing that her presence is the only comfort he has. Their relationship has reached its emotional peak. Kong has crossed an entire world because of his attachment to her, and now he is willing to stand against an overwhelming force to keep her safe. The approaching aircraft begin attacking Kong, and he responds with incredible strength. He fights back against the machines even though he has no real understanding of their technology. His movements are powerful and desperate, showing that he is fighting for survival rather than revenge. Every attack pushes him closer to exhaustion. The aircraft represent the full power of modern civilization, while Kong represents the ancient strength of nature. The battle is visually spectacular, but its emotional meaning is much deeper. Kong is not fighting because he wants to destroy humanity. He is fighting because humanity has invaded his world, captured him, and now refuses to let him live freely. Ann watches the battle with increasing fear. She knows Kong cannot continue forever. She also understands that the people attacking him are unlikely to stop until he is dead or completely defeated. Her emotional struggle becomes heartbreaking because she wants to save Kong but has very little power against the military forces surrounding them. Kong continues protecting her even while he is under attack. His willingness to place himself between Ann and danger demonstrates how deeply he cares about her. This is one of the most important aspects of his character. Despite his enormous size and terrifying appearance, his strongest motivation throughout the story has been protection. He protected Ann on Skull Island, tried to keep her safe in the city, and now continues fighting to defend her from the aircraft. His physical strength is extraordinary, but his emotional loyalty is what makes him memorable. Ann's feelings toward Kong also become clearer during this final sequence. She is no longer afraid of him. Instead, she is terrified of losing him. She understands that Kong has become an important part of her life, even though they come from completely different worlds. Their connection cannot survive naturally in civilization, but the bond they created is real. The movie uses this relationship to make Kong's eventual fate emotionally powerful. Without the connection between Ann and Kong, the final battle would simply be an action sequence. Because of their relationship, every moment carries emotional weight. Kong continues fighting the aircraft, using the height of the building and his enormous strength to defend himself. The battle demonstrates his intelligence as well as his physical power. He reacts to the movements of the aircraft and attempts to protect himself from attacks coming from different directions. Yet the technology of the military gives them a major advantage. Kong can fight individual machines, but he cannot easily overcome an organized force attacking him from the air. His exhaustion becomes increasingly visible. Ann tries to stay with him, but the danger becomes too great. Kong's body begins to weaken, and the audience can sense that the outcome is becoming inevitable. Jack is also involved in the desperate effort to reach Ann. His determination to save her remains strong, but the final confrontation is now largely between Kong and the military. Jack understands that Ann's emotional connection to Kong is genuine, and he realizes that she is facing the possibility of losing someone who protected her when no one else could. The final battle therefore becomes a conflict between survival and sacrifice. Kong knows that he is in danger, but he continues fighting because Ann is beside him. His actions are not those of a creature seeking dominance. They are the actions of someone who refuses to abandon the person he loves and trusts. This makes his character deeply tragic. He is powerful enough to fight almost anything on Skull Island, but in the human world his strength is not enough. Technology, fear, and misunderstanding have placed him in a situation where there is almost no possible escape. Anne desperately tries to communicate with him and make him understand that she cares about him. Kong responds emotionally, and their final moments together become increasingly painful. The sunrise that once seemed beautiful now becomes a symbol of the end. The city below continues as normal, but high above it, Kong is fighting for his life. He has reached the highest point of civilization, yet he has never been farther from home. The symbolism is powerful. The creature who once ruled Skull Island now stands exposed on top of one of humanity's greatest structures, facing the weapons of the modern world. Kong's physical fall from the building represents much more than the defeat of a giant ape. It represents the destruction caused when humans take something from nature without understanding the consequences. Kong never chose to come to New York. He was brought there because one man's ambition turned him into a spectacle. Now he is paying the ultimate price for that decision. Anne's reaction makes the tragedy even more emotional because she understands that Kong's fate is connected to the choices made by others. She never wanted him to suffer, and she never wanted him to be taken from Skull Island. Yet despite her efforts, she cannot completely change the course of events. As Kong becomes weaker, the audience is reminded of how different his life could have been if humans had simply left him alone. He could have remained on Skull Island, protecting his territory and living freely. Instead, he was captured because people wanted to profit from something extraordinary. The final battle therefore becomes the emotional conclusion to the movie's central message about exploitation, loneliness, and the consequences of human ambition. Kong's final moments are tragic because he does not die as a monster defeated by heroes. He dies as a creature who found companionship, experienced trust, and was ultimately destroyed by a world that could never understand where he belonged. Anne's connection with him gives his story meaning, and her sadness confirms that he was never simply a monster to her. The moment leaves a lasting emotional impact because the audience has seen Kong's journey from powerful ruler of Skull Island to vulnerable captive in the human world. By the end of this part, the great battle has reached its heartbreaking conclusion. Kong has fought with everything he has, protected Anne until the very end, and finally fallen from the place where he briefly seemed above the entire city. His story becomes a tragic reminder that strength cannot always overcome fear, technology, and human ambition. The final moments are not really about who won the battle, they are about what was lost. Kong lost his home, his freedom, and ultimately his life, while Anne lost the extraordinary companion who taught her to look beyond appearances. His story remains powerful because beneath the giant creature and spectacular action lies a simple emotional truth. Kong was searching for connection in a world where he had always been alone. The story reaches one of its most iconic stages as Kong and Anne move through the city while the military closes in. Kong's presence has created panic across New York, but the audience understands that the situation is more complicated than a simple monster attack. Kong is not trying to conquer the city. He is trying to protect Anne and escape from the people who have taken him away from his home. His confusion and fear are visible in his behavior, especially whenever Anne is threatened. Anne has become his strongest emotional connection, and she understands that the military response could ultimately lead to his death. The relationship between them is now more powerful because they have moved from the isolated world of Skull Island into a civilization that cannot understand what they share. Kong sees Anne as someone he trusts, while Anne sees Kong as a living creature who deserves freedom. Jack Driscoll continues trying to protect Anne, and his attitude toward Kong has become more complicated. He still knows that Kong is dangerous, but he has begun to understand that the giant ape's actions are driven by attachment rather than an intention to hurt innocent people. Jack's concern for Anne remains his greatest motivation, but he also recognizes that the situation created by Denham is unfair to Kong. The human expedition originally entered Skull Island searching for adventure and opportunity, but the discovery of Kong has transformed their lives in a way none of them expected. Carl Denham, however, continues to represent the opposite perspective. Even after everything that has happened, his ambition and desire for fame remain central to his thinking. He wanted to bring Kong to civilization because he believed the giant ape could make him famous. Now that the situation has become dangerous, the consequences of his decision are becoming impossible to ignore. Kong's escape has exposed the terrible weakness in Denham's plan. A wild creature cannot simply be turned into a harmless attraction. The city becomes a battlefield between modern technology and ancient strength. Kong is surrounded by buildings and streets that are completely unfamiliar to him, while the military has weapons designed to attack targets from a distance. This creates an enormous imbalance. Kong may be physically stronger than any individual human, but he has no understanding of aircraft, firearms, or military strategy. He is fighting an environment where his natural advantages no longer guarantee survival. Yet he continues moving because Ann is beside him. His determination to protect her gives him the courage to face forces far more organized than himself. Ann's presence also changes the way the audience views the city sequence. Without her, Kong might simply appear destructive. With her beside him, the audience can see his emotional motivation. When Ann is safe, Kong becomes calmer. When she is threatened, his protective instincts become stronger. Their relationship gives meaning to every movement he makes. Ann also recognizes that Kong's behavior is partly a response to fear. He has been captured, transported, displayed, and chased. From his perspective, the entire human world has become a source of danger. The only familiar element is Ann. This makes his attachment understandable and heartbreaking. The movie's visual storytelling becomes especially powerful as Kong moves higher into the city. The enormous buildings create a dramatic contrast with his massive body, and the modern skyline becomes the new environment in which his final struggle will take place. Kong's journey toward the highest point of the city feels symbolic. He is searching for a place where he can escape the chaos below and remain close to Ann. At the same time, the audience knows that the military can follow him there. The sense of temporary safety therefore never lasts. Ann and Kong share moments of calm despite the danger surrounding them. These moments are important because they show that their connection is not based only on fear or survival. There is genuine affection between them. Ann's ability to communicate with Kong through simple gestures demonstrates how much trust has developed between them. Kong's response shows that he understands her emotions even without language. This makes their relationship one of the most memorable elements of the movie. Jack continues searching for a way to help Ann, but the situation is moving beyond his control. The military has made the decision to stop Kong, and individual attempts to reason with them have little effect. From their perspective, the giant ape represents an enormous threat, and they are responding according to the information they have. The tragedy is that they do not understand the emotional story behind the situation. They see a dangerous creature, and sees a lonely friend. Both perspectives are understandable, but only one recognizes the full complexity of Kong's character. The movie also emphasizes the consequences of human interference with nature. Kong was taken from Skull Island because humans wanted to profit from something extraordinary. Now he is being hunted because humans are frightened by the consequences of their own actions. This creates a powerful cycle. Humans capture Kong, Kong escapes, humans fear his escape, and that fear leads to greater violence against him. Kong becomes trapped in a situation he never created. Denham's ambition started the chain of events, but everyone in the city is now dealing with the consequences. As Kong continues climbing, the emotional tension becomes almost unbearable. The audience knows that his strength cannot protect him forever. He is facing an entire military force, and his body has already been pushed through enormous physical and emotional stress. Ann understands that the moment may be coming when she will have to say goodbye. Her sadness becomes more visible because she realizes that Kong's attachment to her may ultimately be the reason he refuses to leave the city. Kong has found something worth protecting, but the world he entered cannot allow that relationship to continue. By the end of this part, Kong has reached a position high above the city with Ann, creating one of the film's most unforgettable images. The skyline stretches around them, the city continues moving below, and the military forces prepare for their final attack. Kong appears powerful against the buildings, yet emotionally he has never been more vulnerable. Ann is beside him, and for a brief moment they seem separated from the rest of the world. But the approaching aircraft make it clear that this peaceful moment cannot last. The final confrontation between Kong and the modern world is about to begin, and the outcome will reveal the tragic price of human ambition and the heartbreaking consequences of taking a creature away from the home where he truly belonged. The story becomes even more emotional as Kong continues moving through the city with Anne, trying to escape the forces that are determined to capture him again. The contrast between Kong's natural world and the modern city becomes impossible to ignore. On Skull Island, Kong was powerful and confident because he understood his surroundings. In the city, he is surrounded by unfamiliar buildings, vehicles, crowds, and noise. Yet despite all of this confusion, he remains focused on Anne. She is the one person who makes the strange environment feel less frightening. Their connection becomes the emotional heart of the sequence. Anne understands that Kong is not trying to destroy the city simply for the sake of destruction. He is frightened, confused, and searching for the only person he trusts. The humans, however, see the enormous ape moving through the streets and immediately assume the worst. Their fear creates chaos, and that chaos makes Kong even more defensive. The more people surround him, the more difficult it becomes for him to remain calm. This creates a tragic cycle in which human fear causes Kong to react defensively, and his reactions cause even greater human fear. Anne attempts to break that cycle by staying close to him. Her presence helps Kong focus on something other than the crowds and the military forces surrounding them. She has become his connection to trust and understanding. The emotional bond between them is unusual, but the movie makes it believable through their actions and expressions. Kong does not need words to show that he cares about Anne. His willingness to protect her communicates everything. Anne, in turn, is willing to risk herself to keep Kong from being unnecessarily harmed. This demonstrates how much she has changed since the beginning of the story. She started as someone who was terrified of the giant ape, but now she sees him as a living creature whose life matters. Jack Driscoll remains determined to protect Anne, but he also begins to understand Kong's emotional motivation. His role becomes increasingly complicated because he is caught between wanting Anne to be safe and recognizing that Kong is not simply a mindless monster. Jack can see that Kong's attachment to Anne is genuine, even if the circumstances are impossible. This realization gives Jack a more sympathetic perspective toward Kong. He does not suddenly stop worrying about Anne, but he begins to understand that Kong's actions are driven by emotion rather than pure aggression. Meanwhile, the military response becomes stronger. The authorities are determined to stop Kong because they see him as a massive threat to public safety. Their weapons and aircraft represent the power of modern civilization, while Kong represents the raw strength of nature. This creates a visual and thematic contrast that defines the final portion of the movie. Kong may be physically powerful, but he is facing an enemy that can attack from a distance and use technology he cannot understand. His strength gives him the ability to survive for a time, but the imbalance between him and the modern military becomes increasingly obvious. Kong's movement through the city also creates moments of wonder. Despite the danger surrounding him, there is something almost majestic about seeing this enormous creature among skyscrapers. He appears like a living piece of an ancient world that has suddenly been placed inside modern civilization. The visual scale of these scenes is one of the film's major strengths. Kong's size is not only used for action, it is used to emphasize how completely out of place he is. The city is not his home, and every moment he spends there reminds the audience that he has been taken away from where he belongs. Anne's relationship with Kong becomes even more meaningful because she knows this. She understands that no matter how spectacular the city looks, Kong cannot truly live there. His freedom is connected to the island and the natural world that shaped him. This makes the possibility of returning him home increasingly important, although the story gives little reason to believe such a solution will be possible. Carl Denham's actions continue to cast a shadow over everything happening. His decision to capture Kong created the entire crisis, yet he remains focused on the consequences for his reputation rather than the creature's suffering. He represents the human desire to turn extraordinary experiences into entertainment, even when doing so causes harm. The movie's criticism of this attitude becomes especially powerful during the city scenes because the public is fascinated by Kong while knowing almost nothing about him. They see the spectacle but not the tragedy behind it. Kong's emotional state continues to shift between fear, anger, and affection. When he is with Anne, he appears calmer and more focused. When she is threatened or separated from him, his protective instincts become overwhelming. This demonstrates how deeply he has become attached to her. Unfortunately, that attachment also places him in greater danger because the humans understand that Ann is important to him. Jack tries to help Ann navigate the increasingly dangerous situation, but he knows that the military forces are unlikely to stop simply because Kong has shown emotional attachment. The authorities have made their decision. The giant ape must be stopped. This makes the coming confrontation almost inevitable. The emotional tension becomes stronger because the audience knows that Kong's survival is becoming increasingly unlikely. Ann wants to save him, Jack wants to protect Ann, and the military wants to protect the city. These goals cannot easily exist together. By the end of this part, Kong has become more than a spectacle. He has become a tragic symbol of a creature taken from his natural world and forced into a civilization that does not understand him. Ann remains his strongest connection to humanity, while Jack continues trying to keep her safe. The military response is growing, and the city is becoming increasingly dangerous for Kong. The story is now moving toward the most famous confrontation of the film, where Kong will climb above the city and face the forces of modern civilization. His strength may be enormous, but the emotional stakes are even greater because he is fighting not simply for survival, but for the person who has become his entire world. Kong's situation finally reaches a breaking point as the pressure of captivity becomes impossible for him to tolerate. The giant ape has been taken from the only home he has ever known and placed inside a world that was never designed for him. Everything around him is unfamiliar, from the crowded streets to the towering buildings and the constant noise of civilization. He does not understand why the humans have captured him, and he certainly does not understand why they expect him to remain calm while being treated as a spectacle. His frustration continues to grow until his instinct for freedom becomes stronger than the restraints holding him. This moment is important because Kong's escape is not simply an action sequence. It represents his attempt to reclaim control over his own life. Carl Denham believes that he has finally achieved the success he always wanted, but he has completely underestimated Kong. Denham sees the giant ape as something that can be controlled through technology and planning. He fails to understand that Kong is intelligent, emotionally powerful, and deeply connected to the freedom of his natural environment. Once Kong breaks free, the consequences are immediate. The city becomes a completely different world from Skull Island, and Kong moves through it with a mixture of confusion, fear, and determination. The humans panic because they see an enormous creature moving through their streets, but Kong is not deliberately trying to create chaos. He is searching for something familiar. More than anything, he is looking for Ann. This is what makes his escape so emotionally powerful. Kong is not motivated by revenge or a desire to destroy civilization. His actions are driven by his need to find the person who has become most important to him. Ann also realizes that Kong is free and understands exactly what that means. She knows that the human authorities will see him as an immediate threat, but she also knows that Kong does not understand the danger he is creating. She feels responsible for helping him, even though the situation is becoming increasingly difficult to control. Her emotional connection with Kong now becomes the key to understanding his behavior. Jack Driscoll is also drawn into the chaos as he tries to protect Ann and prevent the situation from becoming even more dangerous. He understands that Kong's presence in the city could lead to a violent confrontation with the authorities. However, he also realizes that Kong is searching for Ann rather than simply attacking people. This gives Jack a more complicated perspective than many of the other characters. He begins to understand that Kong is acting out of desperation rather than pure aggression. The city itself becomes a dramatic contrast to Skull Island. On the island, Kong moved through natural landscapes where his strength gave him control. In the city, his enormous size becomes a disadvantage. Buildings, streets, vehicles, and crowds create obstacles that he does not understand. Humans are everywhere, and their fear makes the situation even more chaotic. Kong's every movement creates panic because people cannot see his intentions. The movie uses this environment to emphasize how out of place Kong is. He is powerful, but he is also lost. The audience can feel the sadness behind the spectacle because Kong has been forced into a world where he does not belong. Ann eventually becomes central to calming Kong and reminding him of the connection they shared on the island. When Kong sees her, his behavior changes because she represents safety and trust. The reunion carries a strong emotional impact because the audience understands how much both characters have experienced since leaving Skull Island. Ann is no longer simply the frightened actress who first encountered Kong. She has become someone who understands him and recognizes his loneliness. Kong, meanwhile, sees Ann as the one person in this strange world who does not treat him as a monster. Their connection is one of the film's greatest emotional strengths. However, their reunion cannot last peacefully because the authorities and military forces are determined to stop Kong. From their perspective, a giant ape moving through the city represents an enormous threat to public safety. They do not know the emotional story behind his actions. They see only the destruction and panic surrounding him. This creates another tragic misunderstanding. Kong is trying to find Ann, while the humans are trying to protect the city from what they believe is a dangerous monster. Neither side can fully communicate with the other. Ann becomes the bridge between them, but even she has limited power to change the situation. Jack's role becomes increasingly important as he attempts to keep Ann safe while also understanding what Kong is trying to do. He knows that the military response could lead to Kong being killed, but he also understands that the authorities will not simply allow the creature to move freely through the city. This creates a race against time. Ann must somehow reach Kong emotionally before the situation becomes irreversible. Denham's responsibility for the crisis becomes more obvious. His desire for fame brought Kong into civilization in the first place. If he had left Kong on Skull Island, none of this would have happened. Instead, his ambition created a situation that has now become dangerous for both Kong and the public. Denham's success is therefore revealed as a terrible mistake. He has achieved fame, but at the cost of the creature he exploited. The movie's themes of ambition and exploitation become stronger as the city sequence develops. Kong's escape demonstrates that nature cannot always be controlled simply because humans have the technology to capture it. His strength allows him to break free, but his emotional attachment to Ann is what truly drives him forward. This combination of power and vulnerability makes him a tragic hero rather than a traditional monster. By the end of this part, Kong has escaped captivity and entered the city, but his freedom is temporary. Ann has found him again, Jack is trying to protect them, and the authorities are preparing to stop the giant ape. Kong's journey has now moved from the wilderness of Skull Island to the heart of civilization, and the contrast could not be greater. He has finally regained some freedom, but he is surrounded by people who fear him and are determined to bring him down. The story is now moving toward its most iconic and heartbreaking sequence, where Kong will attempt to protect his connection with Ann while facing the full power of the human world. Kong's captivity becomes increasingly unbearable as he struggles to understand the strange human world surrounding him. The creature who once ruled the vast wilderness of Skull Island is now trapped inside a civilization filled with buildings, crowds, noise, and technology that he cannot understand. His enormous strength remains, but his freedom has disappeared, and this contrast makes his situation increasingly tragic. Carl Denham continues to view Kong as the greatest discovery of his career, believing that the public's fascination with the giant ape proves that he made the right decision by bringing him back. However, Denham's excitement prevents him from recognizing the suffering behind the spectacle. He has transformed a living creature into entertainment, and he expects Kong to remain obedient simply because humans have managed to capture him. Kong's reactions show that captivity is becoming unbearable. He does not understand the rules of this new environment, and he cannot accept being displayed like an object. His frustration grows as he realizes that the humans have taken away everything familiar to him. The jungle, the cliffs, the sounds of the island, and his freedom are gone. Most importantly, Ann is not always beside him. She has become the one connection between his old life and the strange new world, which makes his attachment to her even stronger. Ann understands Kong's suffering better than anyone else. She remembers the moments when he protected her and the unusual friendship that developed between them. Seeing him surrounded by people who are fascinated by his size makes her uncomfortable because she knows they do not understand him. To the crowd, Kong is an incredible spectacle. To Ann, he is a lonely creature who has been separated from his home. This difference in perspective gives the story much of its emotional power. Jack Driscoll also begins to understand that the situation has gone far beyond a simple rescue mission. His original goal was to find Ann and bring her back safely, but now he sees that Kong has become a victim of Denham's ambition. Jack's feelings toward Kong are complicated because he still recognizes the danger posed by such a powerful creature, yet he can also see that Kong has emotions and that Ann genuinely cares about him. Jack's relationship with Ann becomes more complicated as he realizes how deeply her experience on Skull Island has affected her. She cannot simply forget Kong because he became an important part of her life during one of the most dangerous experiences she has ever faced. Meanwhile, Denham prepares to use Kong's popularity for his own benefit. He believes that the giant ape will make him famous and provide a spectacular performance unlike anything audiences have ever seen. His ambition has become almost completely disconnected from morality. He does not think about whether Kong wants to participate. He thinks only about whether the public will be impressed. This is one of the film's strongest criticisms of exploitation. When something extraordinary is discovered, people may become more interested in possessing it than understanding it. Kong represents nature in its most powerful form, while Denham represents the human desire to control and profit from nature. The contrast between them becomes increasingly clear. Kong's emotional connection with Ann also becomes more important as he struggles with captivity. Ann is the only person who can make him feel understood. When she is near him, his behavior becomes calmer, and his attention shifts away from the surrounding chaos. Their connection does not depend on words. Kong communicates through his eyes, gestures, movements, and reactions, while Ann responds with patience and compassion. This makes their relationship feel remarkably human despite the enormous difference between them. The movie uses Kong's expressions to show that his emotions are not simple. He can experience fear, anger, affection, confusion, jealousy, and loneliness. This emotional complexity makes it difficult to see him as merely a monster. He becomes a tragic character whose greatest weakness is the same thing that makes him sympathetic: his ability to care deeply. As the pressure around Kong increases, it becomes clear that he will not remain under human control forever. The people responsible for his captivity believe that chains, walls, and weapons can keep him contained, but they underestimate his intelligence and determination. Kong does not want to rule the city. He simply wants freedom and wants to find Ann. His motivation is personal rather than destructive. Unfortunately, his enormous size means that even an attempt to escape can cause destruction. This creates an important tragedy. Kong may not intend to hurt innocent people, but his presence in a human city automatically creates fear and chaos. Ann realizes that the situation is becoming dangerous. She knows that Kong cannot stay imprisoned, but she also understands that if he escapes, humans will see him as an even greater threat. She is therefore caught between wanting to help him and fearing what might happen next. Her emotional connection to Kong makes the situation painful because she understands that there may be no perfect solution. If Kong remains captive, he loses his freedom. If he escapes, the human world will likely respond with force. Jack begins to recognize this problem as well. He understands that the situation cannot be solved simply by capturing Kong again. There is now a much larger question about whether the humans have any right to keep him at all. The movie's emotional tension increases because the audience can see the tragedy approaching long before the characters fully understand it. Kong's captivity is not a victory. It is the beginning of his downfall. Denham believes he has achieved something extraordinary, but his success has placed Kong in an environment where survival will be almost impossible. Ann's growing concern suggests that she knows the situation is heading toward disaster. By the end of this part, Kong's desire for freedom has become stronger than ever. The human world may have captured his body, but it cannot control his instincts or his emotional attachment to Ann. Denham continues believing that fame will justify his actions, while Jack and Ann increasingly recognize the human cost of the situation. Kong is preparing to break free, and once he does, the city will become the stage for the most dramatic conflict of the story. The creature who was once the king of Skull Island is about to enter a world that fears him, misunderstands him, and ultimately cannot give him the freedom he desperately needs. Kong's arrival in the human world completely changes the direction of the story. On Skull Island, he was the dominant creature of his environment, moving freely through the jungle and protecting his territory. Now he is surrounded by buildings, crowds, bright lights, and people who see him as an unbelievable attraction. The contrast is heartbreaking because the audience knows that Kong does not belong in this environment. He has been taken from a world where he understood everything and placed into a society where almost nothing makes sense to him. Carl Denham is thrilled by the attention surrounding Kong. He believes that his discovery has finally given him the success he always wanted. The giant ape has become a public spectacle, and Denham sees the crowds as proof that his risky expedition was worth it. However, his excitement also reveals how little he understands the emotional cost of what he has done. Kong is not simply an extraordinary object that can be displayed for entertainment. He is a living creature who has been separated from his home and the person he trusts most. Ann is deeply uncomfortable with the way Kong is being presented. She remembers the Kong she met on Skull Island, not the version being shown to the public. She remembers his loneliness, his curiosity, and the moments when he protected her from danger. Because of this, she can see the tragedy that everyone else is ignoring. The audience is encouraged to view Kong through Ann's perspective rather than through the eyes of the crowd. The people watching him are fascinated by his size, but Ann understands that his enormous strength does not mean he is happy. Kong's emotional state becomes increasingly unstable as he struggles to understand his new surroundings. The noises and crowds are completely unfamiliar. On the island, he could escape into the jungle whenever he wanted, but now he is surrounded by walls and human structures. His captivity makes him frustrated and confused. The movie uses this contrast to show how quickly a powerful creature can become helpless when removed from the environment where it belongs. Kong's physical strength remains enormous, but his freedom has disappeared. Jack Driscoll also begins to see the consequences of Denham's actions more clearly. His original goal was to rescue Ann, but now he realizes that bringing her back was only one part of the problem. Kong has been brought into a world where he has no place. Jack begins questioning whether Denham's plan was ever justified. His feelings toward Kong are more complicated than before because he has seen enough to understand that Kong is not simply a monster. Jack also realizes that Ann's emotional connection with Kong is genuine. She cannot simply forget the creature who protected her on the island. This creates tension between Jack and Ann because Jack wants to keep her safe, while Ann feels responsible for Kong's suffering. Denham, meanwhile, continues believing that the public fascination with Kong will lead to enormous success. His confidence blinds him to the danger that is building. He assumes that because Kong has been captured, he can also be controlled. This assumption is one of his greatest mistakes. Kong's behavior makes it clear that captivity is becoming unbearable. The more confined he feels, the stronger his desire to escape becomes. He does not understand why humans have taken him from his home, and he cannot accept being treated as a spectacle. His emotional connection to Ann also becomes increasingly important because she represents the only familiar and comforting part of the new world. Kong associates Ann with safety, trust, and companionship. Without her, the human world becomes even more frightening. When Kong sees Ann again, the emotional impact is immediate. His reaction shows that she is still deeply important to him. Ann also realizes how much he has suffered. Their reunion is not simply a romantic moment, it is a reminder of everything that has happened since the expedition arrived on Skull Island. Ann understands that Kong has been taken from his natural environment because of human ambition. She also knows that she may be one of the only people capable of calming him. Their connection remains one of the most unusual aspects of the movie because it exists without traditional communication. Kong cannot speak to Ann in human language, but his expressions and actions communicate his feelings clearly. The movie's visual storytelling becomes especially important here. Kong's face and body language reveal confusion, affection, anger, and sadness. This allows the audience to connect emotionally with him even though he is an enormous fictional creature. The film therefore transforms Kong from a spectacle into a tragic character. His size may be impressive, but his emotions make him vulnerable. As the situation develops, Kong's desire for freedom becomes impossible to ignore. He begins resisting the human world, and the people around him become increasingly afraid of what might happen if he escapes. Denham sees this as another problem that must be controlled, but the audience understands that Kong's behavior is a natural response to captivity. He is not trying to conquer civilization. He is trying to return to freedom and find the person he trusts. This distinction becomes crucial to understanding the tragedy of the story. Ann's role becomes increasingly important as she watches Kong struggle. She begins to realize that there may be no peaceful way for him to remain in the human world. Even if he could be contained, he would never truly belong there. His natural home is Skull Island, and his freedom is connected to the environment where he has lived all his life. The more the humans try to control him, the more dangerous the situation becomes. By the end of this part, Kong's captivity has become the central conflict. Denham believes he has achieved the greatest success of his career, but his success is built on the suffering of a creature who never chose to leave his home. Ann wants to protect Kong and understands the tragedy unfolding around him. Jack begins to question the morality of Denham's actions. Kong himself is becoming increasingly desperate to escape. The story is now approaching the moment when the giant ape will break free and enter the human city, leading to one of the film's most memorable and emotional sequences. What began as an expedition for fame and adventure has now become a struggle between freedom and captivity, and Kong is about to show the world that he cannot simply be treated as an attraction. The story moves into an even more dramatic stage as the human expedition finally succeeds in gaining control over Kong. After everything that has happened on Skull Island, the giant ape is no longer simply the mysterious ruler of a hidden world. He has become a target of human ambition. Ann understands the tragedy of what is happening, because she knows Kong is not an ordinary animal that can simply be captured and transported somewhere else. He has a home, a territory, memories, and an emotional connection to the island. Yet the humans around her see the situation very differently. Carl Denham sees the greatest opportunity of his career. He believes that presenting Kong to the public will make him famous and transform his movie into an unforgettable spectacle. His excitement about success prevents him from thinking about what captivity will mean for Kong. This is where the movie's central theme of exploitation becomes especially clear. The human world has discovered something extraordinary, but instead of protecting it, people immediately begin thinking about how they can own it. Kong's capture is therefore not simply an action sequence, it represents the moment when a wild creature is removed from the only world he understands. For Kong, the situation is terrifying and confusing. He does not understand the technology, weapons, or intentions of the humans. He only knows that he has been separated from his home and that Ann is no longer safely beside him. His anger and fear are understandable because his entire world has been taken away. Ann feels responsible for what has happened even though she did not choose it. She knows that Kong trusted her, and seeing him captured creates a painful emotional conflict. She wants to help him, but she is also being taken back to civilization herself. Her connection with Kong has changed the way she sees the world. Before arriving on Skull Island, she might have viewed a giant creature as something frightening and dangerous. Now she understands that Kong has emotions and that his suffering is real. This change in Ann's perspective becomes one of the most important emotional developments in the story. Jack Driscoll also begins to recognize that the situation is more complicated than he originally believed. He had been focused on rescuing Ann, but he can now see the consequences of Denham's ambitions. Kong is no longer threatening Ann because he is being transported into a world where he will have no freedom. Jack's feelings about the situation become more complicated as he watches Denham prepare to turn Kong into a public spectacle. The contrast between Jack and Denham becomes increasingly strong. Jack is concerned about the people involved, while Denham is focused on the opportunity. Denham's confidence suggests that he believes fame will justify everything he has done. He is convinced that the public will be amazed by Kong, and he cannot imagine that his plan might lead to tragedy. Kong's transition from Skull Island to the human world changes the tone of the movie. The mysterious adventure becomes a story about civilization confronting something it cannot truly understand. On the island, Kong was powerful and dominant. In the human world, he becomes a captive. This reversal is emotionally powerful because the audience has already seen what Kong is capable of. They know that he belongs in the wild, where he can move freely and defend himself. Seeing him confined and controlled creates a strong sense of injustice. The movie also explores the idea that people often fear what they do not understand. Instead of seeing Kong as an intelligent creature with emotions, many people are likely to see him as a dangerous spectacle. His enormous size and unfamiliar appearance make it easy for people to treat him as something less than a living being. This is exactly what Denham takes advantage of. He presents Kong as an extraordinary attraction rather than a creature who has been separated from his home. Ann becomes increasingly uncomfortable with the attention surrounding Kong. She understands the emotional truth behind the spectacle. The public may be fascinated by his size, but they do not know what he has lost. They have not seen Kong protecting Ann or exploring the island. They have not experienced the quiet moments that revealed his personality. They see only the enormous ape standing before them, while Ann remembers the lonely creature who allowed her into his world. This difference between public perception and personal experience makes the situation even more tragic. Kong's emotions remain central as he struggles to understand his new environment. The noise, crowds, lights, and unfamiliar surroundings are completely different from Skull Island. His reactions show that he is not adapting comfortably. Instead of feeling powerful, he appears confused and frustrated. His behavior demonstrates how cruel captivity can be when a creature has no understanding of why it has been imprisoned. The humans may believe they have accomplished something incredible, but the audience understands that their success comes at a terrible cost. Denham continues pushing forward with his plan because he believes the spectacle will make him legendary. His ambition has now reached the point where he ignores the obvious signs that Kong is suffering. This makes him increasingly responsible for what happens next. He could have chosen to leave Kong on Skull Island, but his desire for fame brought the creature into an environment that could never accept him. Ann begins realizing that Kong's story is moving toward a tragic conclusion. She cannot simply return to her old life and forget what happened. Her experience on Skull Island has changed her permanently. She has learned that the creature everyone fears may actually be more emotionally complex than many humans. This creates a powerful emotional contrast between Kong's nature and human behavior. Kong can be violent, but his violence is usually connected to survival or protection. Humans, meanwhile, can cause enormous harm because of greed, ambition, and the desire for entertainment. By the end of this part, Kong's fate has become the central concern of the story. He has been taken from his home and brought into a world that sees him as a spectacle. Ann is deeply concerned about what will happen to him, while Jack begins to question Denham's motives. Denham remains convinced that his plan will make him famous, but the audience can already see the danger approaching. Kong's captivity cannot last peacefully because he was never meant to live under human control. The story is now moving toward the most iconic and tragic section of the film, where Kong will attempt to escape the world that has imprisoned him and return to the person who has become the most important part of his life. The tension reaches a major turning point as the humans finally begin putting their plans into action, and Kong's world starts to collapse around him. Ann has already developed a deep connection with Kong, but she understands that she cannot remain on Skull Island forever. She knows that Jack and the other survivors are searching for her, and she also realizes that the people who came with her are not interested in understanding Kong the way she does. This creates a painful emotional conflict for her. Kong, meanwhile, has become increasingly attached to Ann and sees her as someone who belongs with him. He does not understand the human world or the reasons Ann might need to leave. From his perspective, the approaching strangers are simply taking away the person he trusts. This makes Kong increasingly defensive and emotional. The audience can see that his reactions are not simply the actions of a violent monster. They are the reactions of a lonely creature who is terrified of losing the only companion he has found. Jack Driscoll continues his determination to rescue Ann, but the closer he gets to her, the more complicated the situation becomes. Jack believes that Kong is holding Ann against her will, and he cannot easily understand why Ann appears to have developed sympathy for the creature. Jack's motivation is understandable, but his lack of knowledge about their relationship creates a dangerous misunderstanding. He wants to protect Ann, but his actions could put Kong in a position where he feels forced to fight. The movie uses this conflict to show how easily fear can turn into violence when people do not understand one another. Carl Denham, however, sees the situation as an opportunity. His ambition has completely taken over his judgment. Instead of thinking about Ann's safety or Kong's freedom, he is focused on the possibility of bringing the giant ape back to civilization. He imagines the fame that will come from presenting Kong to the public. His confidence makes him believe that capturing Kong is not only possible but worthwhile. This attitude becomes one of the major reasons the tragedy develops. Denham treats Kong as an object rather than a living creature. The contrast between Denham and Ann becomes increasingly clear. Ann has learned that Kong can feel loneliness, fear, affection, and curiosity. Denham only sees size, spectacle, and profit. He does not understand that removing Kong from Skull Island could destroy the balance of his entire life. The plan to capture Kong therefore becomes more than an adventure. It becomes an act of exploitation. As the humans prepare their attack, Kong remains focused on protecting Ann. His strength is enormous, but his emotional state makes him vulnerable. He is not fighting simply to dominate the humans. He is fighting because he believes they are taking away someone important to him. This gives the conflict a tragic emotional foundation. Ann realizes that violence could lead to Kong being seriously hurt, so she tries to keep him calm. Her presence is one of the few things capable of changing his behavior. Their connection has developed to the point where Kong responds to her in a way he does not respond to anyone else. This makes Ann's role especially important in the coming confrontation. The expedition members are also becoming increasingly aware of how difficult their situation is. They have already lost people to the island's dangers, and now they are preparing to confront the most powerful creature they have ever seen. The fear among the group is understandable, but Denham's determination pushes them forward. He convinces himself that the risks are worth taking because Kong could change his career forever. This shows how ambition can make a person ignore obvious danger. The island continues to feel like a world that does not belong to humans. Its enormous creatures and ancient landscapes remind the audience that Kong is not an unnatural part of this environment. He is part of it. He has survived here because he understands the rules of the island. The humans, on the other hand, are outsiders who believe their technology gives them control. This contrast becomes even more important when they begin trying to capture him. Kong's physical strength allows him to resist, but the humans have one advantage he cannot easily overcome: technology and numbers. Ann watches the conflict develop with growing fear. She does not want Jack to be harmed, but she also does not want Kong to be captured. Her emotional position becomes increasingly impossible because she cares about people on both sides. She understands that Kong cannot simply come with her peacefully, but she also knows that leaving him behind may not be possible anymore. The story creates a sense of inevitability as the human world closes in on Kong. What began as a mysterious expedition has transformed into a confrontation between civilization and nature. Kong has no understanding of human ambition, fame, or money. He only understands his territory and his attachment to Ann. Denham's desire to turn him into a spectacle therefore becomes especially cruel. By the end of this part, the plan to capture Kong is moving forward, and the emotional tension has reached a dangerous level. Ann knows that the humans are about to take control of a situation they do not fully understand. Jack is determined to rescue her, while Kong is determined to protect her. Denham is prepared to use Kong for his own success. The three motivations are now heading toward the same unavoidable event. Kong's greatest vulnerability is no longer his physical strength but his emotional attachment to Ann, and the humans are about to exploit exactly that weakness. The next stage of the story will move away from the mysterious world of Skull Island and toward a much larger conflict, where Kong will face the consequences of being discovered by civilization. The story reaches an important turning point as the human expedition finally closes in on Kong and Ann, creating a conflict that has been building since the moment the outsiders arrived on Skull Island. Ann has spent enough time with Kong to understand that he is not simply a monster. She has witnessed his intelligence, his loneliness, his strength, and his protective nature. Because of this, she no longer wants to see him harmed. However, Jack Driscoll is determined to rescue Ann and bring her back to the human world. From his perspective, he is doing exactly what a person should do when someone he cares about is trapped on a dangerous island with a giant creature. The tragedy is that Jack does not understand the emotional connection between Ann and Kong. Kong also does not understand Jack's intentions. He sees the approaching humans as a threat because they are moving toward Ann, the one person he has come to trust. This misunderstanding creates a powerful emotional conflict. Ann is caught between two people who both want to protect her but belong to completely different worlds. The situation becomes more dangerous as Kong becomes increasingly defensive. His enormous size gives him the power to intimidate the humans, but the audience can also see that his aggression is connected to fear. Kong is afraid of losing Ann. This makes his behavior more tragic than purely violent. He has spent his life alone, surrounded by creatures that challenge his dominance, and Ann has become the first person to give him companionship. The idea of losing her is therefore extremely painful for him. Anne understands this, which makes her increasingly worried about what will happen when the humans try to take her away. She knows that Kong may react violently if he believes the humans are trying to hurt her. Jack and the others, meanwhile, are already under enormous pressure. Their journey through Skull Island has cost them dearly, and they have seen enough evidence of Kong's power to know that confronting him will be dangerous. Yet Jack refuses to abandon Anne. His determination gives the rescue mission emotional weight because he is willing to face enormous danger for her. This also creates an interesting contrast between Jack and Denham. Jack is motivated by personal concern, while Denham is motivated by ambition. Both men are approaching the same situation, but they see completely different things. Jack sees Anne as someone who needs to be saved. Denham sees Kong as something that needs to be captured. Denham's plans become increasingly clear as he realizes that the giant ape could become the greatest attraction the world has ever seen. His imagination is filled with thoughts of fame, money, and public attention. He does not stop to consider whether Kong should be removed from his natural environment. This makes Denham's ambition increasingly dangerous. He believes that because he discovered Kong, he has the right to control him. The movie uses Denham's character to explore the darker side of human curiosity. Discovering something extraordinary can inspire wonder, but it can also create a desire to possess and exploit it. Kong becomes a victim of that desire. Anne's connection with Kong makes the situation even more complicated because she recognizes the danger before the others do. She knows that Kong belongs to Skull Island. She understands that taking him away from the island would separate him from everything he knows. Even though she must return to civilization, she begins to realize that Kong may not survive the human world. This creates a heartbreaking contrast. Anne has found companionship with Kong, but she cannot stay with him permanently. Kong has found someone he trusts, but he does not understand why she might have to leave. The emotional connection is therefore doomed by circumstances beyond either character's control. The action becomes more intense as the humans prepare to confront Kong. The island's dangerous environment continues to make everything harder. Even before facing Kong, the expedition has to survive enormous creatures and difficult terrain. These obstacles emphasize how extraordinary Kong truly is. If humans are struggling to survive against the island's predators, then capturing the creature that dominates this environment will require extreme force and planning. Kong's strength is demonstrated again as he faces threats that would easily destroy a normal human being. But his emotional vulnerability remains his greatest weakness. He is willing to risk everything to protect Anne. The audience can feel the tragedy approaching because Kong's greatest strength is also connected to the thing that will eventually lead to his downfall. Anne tries to influence Kong through trust and communication rather than force. She understands that violence will only make the situation worse. Her ability to calm him shows how much their relationship has changed. At the beginning, she was terrified of Kong. Now she is one of the few people capable of approaching him without immediately triggering aggression. This emotional connection makes Anne essential to the story because she is the bridge between Kong and the human world. Unfortunately, the humans around her do not fully understand what she has experienced. They see the obvious danger of Kong's size but cannot see the emotional bond behind it. The story therefore creates a tragic misunderstanding where every character believes they are acting correctly. Jack believes he is saving Anne. Kong believes he is protecting her. Anne wants to prevent Kong from being harmed. Denham wants to capture Kong and turn him into a spectacle. Their goals are now moving toward direct conflict. By the end of this part, the story has reached a point where there is almost no peaceful way forward. Kong's attachment to Anne has become too strong. Jack's determination to rescue her has become too intense, and Denham's ambition has made him willing to take extreme measures. Anne knows that something terrible may happen if the humans and Kong confront each other. The emotional tragedy is already visible before the final events occur. Kong has found the companionship he desperately wanted, but the arrival of the human expedition threatens to take it away. The next stage of the story will reveal whether Kong can protect Anne from the human world or whether his own emotional attachment will ultimately lead him toward captivity and tragedy. The situation becomes increasingly dangerous as the human expedition moves closer to Kong and Anne. By this stage, Anne has developed a strong emotional understanding of Kong, while Jack remains determined to rescue her. The problem is that neither side completely understands what the other is trying to accomplish. Jack sees Kong as a giant creature that has taken Ann away, while Kong sees the approaching humans as a threat to the only companion he has found. This misunderstanding creates the emotional foundation for the next major conflict. Ann is caught between two worlds, and she knows that both Jack and Kong care about her in completely different ways. Her experience with Kong has changed her perception of him. She is no longer simply terrified by his enormous size. She has seen his intelligence, his loneliness, and his willingness to protect her. Kong's behavior around Ann reveals a softer side that would be impossible to see during his battles with the island's predators. He can be aggressive when defending himself or Ann, but he can also show patience and curiosity. Their communication remains mostly physical, yet it feels surprisingly clear. Ann uses her movements and expressions to calm him, and Kong responds to her in ways that suggest he understands more than the humans expect. This connection becomes one of the strongest emotional elements of the movie. Meanwhile, Jack and the remaining members of the expedition continue fighting through the dangerous environment of Skull Island. The island's creatures have already caused enormous losses, and the survivors are exhausted. Every step toward Ann becomes more difficult because the island is filled with predators that are far larger and stronger than anything they have encountered before. The group has to rely on teamwork and courage, but even their weapons and experience provide limited protection. The journey makes it clear that humans are not naturally dominant in this environment. They are outsiders trying to survive in a world that has existed without them for thousands of years. Kong, in contrast, moves through this environment with confidence. He understands the island's dangers and knows how to fight its creatures. His enormous strength makes him one of the dominant beings on Skull Island, but his emotional attachment to Ann makes him vulnerable in a completely different way. Carl Denham begins to recognize this vulnerability. His interest in Kong becomes increasingly focused on capturing him rather than simply documenting the island. Denham imagines the fame and money that could come from presenting Kong to the public. He sees the giant ape as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and becomes willing to take greater risks to achieve his goal. This makes him one of the most important sources of conflict in the story because he represents the human tendency to exploit anything extraordinary. Denham does not understand that Kong's value cannot be measured by how much money or attention he might generate. Ann sees Kong as a living being, while Denham sees him as a product. The difference between these perspectives becomes more obvious as the expedition gets closer to capturing him. Ann's emotional connection with Kong also creates a difficult moral problem. She knows she cannot stay on Skull Island forever, but she also knows that taking Kong away from his home could destroy him. Kong belongs to the island, and removing him from that environment would mean placing him inside a world he does not understand. Ann begins to realize that the human world may be far more dangerous to Kong than the island's monsters. This is an important shift in the story because the audience begins to understand that Kong's greatest threat is not another giant creature. It is human ambition. Jack eventually comes closer to Ann, but the reunion is complicated by Kong's presence. Jack's goal is to bring Ann back to safety, yet Kong interprets the humans' approach as an attack. The tension between them rises because both sides are motivated by protection. Jack wants to protect Ann from Kong, while Kong wants to protect Ann from the humans. Ann becomes the emotional link between them, but the circumstances make communication nearly impossible. The movie builds suspense by allowing the audience to understand both perspectives while the characters themselves cannot. Kong's emotional attachment becomes stronger as he realizes that Ann may be taken away. His reactions reveal fear and desperation rather than simple aggression. This makes him a tragic figure because he does not understand why the humans want to separate him from the person he has come to trust. His enormous physical power cannot solve the emotional problem he faces. Ann also begins to understand that she may not be able to protect Kong from the consequences of human discovery. The movie's action and emotional storytelling work together here. Every dangerous encounter reminds the audience of Kong's strength, but every emotional scene reminds them of his vulnerability. This combination prevents him from becoming a simple monster. He becomes a character whose strength and weakness exist side by side. The island itself continues to feel like a living environment filled with ancient dangers. The prehistoric creatures, enormous landscapes, and isolated civilization make Skull Island feel completely separate from the world the characters know. This setting makes the coming transition even more significant. If Kong leaves the island, he will be entering a world where his size and appearance will make him a spectacle rather than a ruler. The humans may believe they are bringing back a great discovery, but they do not understand the consequences of removing Kong from his natural home. By the end of this part, the conflict is approaching its most important stage. Anne wants to protect Kong but knows she must eventually return to civilization. Jack is determined to rescue her and believes he is doing the right thing. Denham is focused on capturing Kong and turning him into a sensation. Kong is desperate to keep Anne close, unaware of how powerful the human world has become. The emotional tension is now almost impossible to avoid. The expedition has moved beyond simple survival, and the choices made next will determine Kong's fate. What began as an adventure to discover something extraordinary is rapidly becoming a tragedy caused by the collision between two worlds. The story moves into an even more emotional stage as the human expedition finally gets closer to the world where Anne and Kong have formed their unusual bond. By now, Anne has spent enough time with Kong to understand that he is not simply a dangerous creature. She has seen his strength, his loneliness, his curiosity, and most importantly, his protective nature. Their relationship has developed without conventional communication, yet their actions speak clearly. Kong has repeatedly protected Anne from the dangers of Skull Island, while Anne has learned to respond to him with trust rather than pure fear. This connection becomes increasingly important because the outside world is about to interfere with it. Jack Driscoll continues leading the search for Anne, determined to bring her home safely. His concern is genuine, but he does not know what has happened between Anne and Kong. To Jack, the giant ape represents an enormous threat, and his priority is rescuing Anne. As he moves closer to Kong's territory, the possibility of a confrontation becomes unavoidable. The expedition members are already exhausted from the dangers they have faced, and the island continues throwing new obstacles in their path. Their journey demonstrates how little prepared they were for Skull Island. They arrived believing they were making a movie, but they have become survivors fighting against an environment filled with creatures far beyond anything they could have imagined. Meanwhile, Carl Denham's ambitions continue growing. He is increasingly convinced that Kong could make him famous. Instead of considering the consequences of capturing a creature that clearly belongs to the island, Denham focuses on how much attention the discovery could bring. His attitude represents one of the movie's strongest themes: the human desire to turn something extraordinary into entertainment. Kong is a living creature with emotions, but Denham sees him as a spectacle. This difference becomes more disturbing as the story progresses because the audience understands that Kong has developed a genuine emotional connection with Anne. Denham does not see that connection as something meaningful. He sees it as another part of the story he can use to create a successful show. Anne's feelings toward Kong are much more complicated. She knows that she must eventually return to the human world, but she has also begun to understand Kong's loneliness. She recognizes that he has protected her and that his attachment comes from a genuine emotional need for companionship. This makes her situation difficult because she cannot simply forget what Kong has done for her. She is grateful to him, but she also knows that staying on Skull Island is not a realistic future. The emotional conflict becomes stronger because there is no easy answer. Kong cannot enter Anne's world naturally, and Anne cannot remain in his world forever. Their connection exists between two completely different worlds. The movie uses this relationship to explore themes of loneliness and belonging. Kong is physically powerful but emotionally isolated. Anne is surrounded by people but has also experienced loneliness and hardship. Their connection develops because both characters understand what it means to feel alone, even though their lives are completely different. This makes their bond more meaningful than a simple relationship between a human and a giant creature. As Jack's group continues searching, the danger increases. The expedition members encounter more of the island's prehistoric wildlife, and every encounter reminds them that survival is uncertain. The action sequences become larger and more intense, but the emotional story remains at the center. Kong's ability to survive these creatures demonstrates his strength, yet the audience also begins to realize that strength will not protect him from the human world. His greatest vulnerability is his attachment to Anne. If humans discover how important she is to him, they can use that connection against him. This is exactly what begins to happen as the expedition closes in. Kong becomes increasingly aware that strangers are approaching. His protective instincts make him defensive, especially because he sees the humans as a threat to Ann. Jack, however, sees Kong's defensive behavior as confirmation that the creature is dangerous. This creates a tragic misunderstanding. Kong is trying to protect someone he cares about, while Jack is trying to protect the same person from what he believes is a monster. Neither side understands the emotional connection from the other's perspective. Ann becomes the only person who can see both sides clearly. She knows that Jack cares about her, but she also knows that Kong has saved her life. Her feelings are therefore divided between the human world she belongs to and the creature who has become emotionally important to her. The native inhabitants' fear of Kong also becomes more understandable as the story progresses. They have built their lives around surviving the island's dangers, and Kong represents a powerful force that cannot easily be controlled. Their ancient walls and rituals demonstrate how long they have lived with these threats. The outsiders, however, underestimate the significance of everything they see. Denham especially believes that his equipment and weapons will allow him to control whatever he encounters. This confidence becomes increasingly dangerous because Kong is unlike anything the humans have ever attempted to capture. The tension rises as the expedition prepares to move against Kong. Jack wants to rescue Ann, while Denham is thinking about what capturing Kong could mean for his career. Their goals overlap temporarily, but their motivations are very different. Jack cares about Ann's safety, while Denham cares about the opportunity. This difference will become important later because it reveals that the expedition is not united by the same purpose. By the end of this part, the emotional connection between Ann and Kong has reached a critical point. Ann understands that Kong cares deeply for her, and Kong clearly sees her as someone worth protecting. Jack is getting closer, and Denham's plans are becoming more aggressive. The island has already tested the humans physically, but the next challenge will test them emotionally and morally. The conflict between love, rescue, ambition, and exploitation is now ready to explode, and Kong's greatest battle may not be against another giant creature but against the human world that wants to take him away from the only companion he has found. The tension rises as the search for Ann brings the human expedition closer to Kong's territory. By this point, the story has made it clear that Skull Island is not simply a dangerous location but an ancient world where humans are completely out of their depth. Jack Driscoll and the remaining crew continue moving through the jungle, facing enormous creatures and increasingly difficult obstacles. Their determination to rescue Ann keeps them moving forward even when the danger becomes overwhelming. Jack is no longer thinking about the movie or the expedition itself. His attention is focused almost entirely on finding Ann and making sure she survives. Meanwhile, Ann's relationship with Kong continues to develop in a surprising way. She has learned that Kong is capable of emotions that are far more complex than she originally imagined. His strength makes him terrifying, but his actions toward Ann reveal a protective and almost gentle side. Ann begins to understand that Kong is not simply keeping her with him because he wants to dominate her. He appears to have formed a genuine attachment to her, partly because she represents companionship in a world where he is otherwise completely alone. Kong's loneliness becomes an important part of his character. He is powerful enough to defeat almost any creature on the island, yet there is no one like him. He is essentially alone in a world that is slowly becoming hostile even to him. Ann's arrival gives him something he has not had for a long time. Someone who reacts to him with curiosity instead of immediately trying to destroy him. This helps explain why his attachment becomes so strong. Ann also begins to recognize that Kong's protection is not entirely selfish. He repeatedly places himself between her and danger, demonstrating that he values her safety. Their connection develops through actions rather than words, and this makes the relationship surprisingly emotional. Some of the most effective moments come from the contrast between Kong's enormous physical size and the subtle emotions shown through his expressions. He can appear terrifying one moment and vulnerable the next. While this relationship grows, Carl Denham becomes increasingly focused on the possibilities of capturing Kong. His ambition has reached a dangerous level. He believes that bringing the giant ape back to civilization will make him famous and prove that his filmmaking vision was correct. Denham's obsession with fame prevents him from seeing the ethical problem of what he is planning. To him, Kong is an extraordinary discovery. To Ann, he is a living creature. This difference in perspective creates the foundation for the tragedy that is beginning to develop. Jack and his companions continue facing the dangers of the island, and their journey becomes increasingly desperate. The prehistoric creatures are not simply obstacles, they show how little control humans have over this environment. The group has entered a world where the normal rules of survival have changed. Even experienced characters can become helpless when faced with creatures many times their size. These action sequences also demonstrate Kong's unique position on the island. He is not merely another predator. He is one of the dominant forces within this ecosystem. When Kong confronts dangerous creatures, his strength and intelligence allow him to survive battles that would be impossible for humans. Yet the movie also shows that physical power does not guarantee happiness. Kong can defeat monsters, but he cannot escape loneliness or emotional attachment. Ann becomes the one thing that makes his world feel less empty. As Jack's group gets closer, the possibility of a confrontation becomes stronger. Jack wants to rescue Ann, but he does not understand the emotional bond that has formed between her and Kong. From his perspective, Kong is a dangerous creature holding Ann against her will. From Kong's perspective, the approaching humans represent a threat to the only companion he has found. This difference makes the coming conflict more tragic because both sides believe they are acting for the right reason. Ann is caught in the middle. She understands Jack's desire to save her, but she also understands that Kong has protected her. She cannot easily explain this complicated relationship to the humans, especially because Kong cannot communicate through human language. The film uses this situation to create emotional tension rather than presenting a simple hero and monster story. At the same time, the island's native inhabitants remain an important part of the atmosphere. Their fear of Kong and their ancient rituals suggest that the giant ape has existed as a powerful presence for generations. The massive wall surrounding their settlement shows how seriously they take the threat of the island's creatures. The humans from the outside world, however, do not fully understand the significance of these warnings. Their confidence in technology and weapons makes them believe they can control a world they barely understand. This arrogance becomes increasingly dangerous. Denham especially believes that modern technology can solve any problem. His confidence in his ability to capture Kong is based on the assumption that Kong can be treated like an ordinary animal. But Kong's intelligence and emotional attachment to Ann make him far more unpredictable. The movie continues preparing the audience for the inevitable moment when the human world and Kong's world collide. The closer Jack gets to Ann, the more difficult it becomes for Kong to keep her safe. Kong's protective instincts become stronger, while the humans become more determined to remove Ann from the island. The emotional stakes are therefore rising alongside the physical danger. By the end of this part, Ann and Kong have formed a bond strong enough to influence the entire story. Jack is approaching them with the intention of rescuing Ann, while Denham is preparing to capture Kong for his own ambitions. The island remains filled with danger, but the greatest conflict is now becoming clear. Kong wants to protect the one person he has grown to trust, while the humans want to take her back and turn Kong into something they can control. The story is moving toward a major confrontation where Ann's connection with Kong will be tested, and the consequences will begin changing all of their lives. The journey continues as Ann becomes increasingly comfortable around Kong, and their unusual relationship begins to reveal a deeper emotional connection. What started as fear slowly changes into curiosity and trust. Ann has already discovered that Kong is not simply a mindless beast, and every interaction between them gives her another reason to see him differently. Kong's behavior toward Ann becomes protective, and he begins treating her as something precious rather than simply another creature on the island. This emotional connection becomes especially powerful because neither of them can communicate through ordinary language. Their expressions, gestures, and actions become the language of their relationship. Ann's courage also becomes more important as she realizes that surviving around Kong requires her to understand his behavior instead of constantly running from him. She learns that Kong can be dangerous when threatened, but he can also be calm and gentle when he trusts someone. This creates a fascinating contrast within his character. He is the most powerful creature on the island, yet around Ann he reveals a vulnerable side that nobody else has seen. Meanwhile, Jack Driscoll continues his desperate search for Ann. He and the remaining members of the expedition face increasingly dangerous situations as they move through the island. The environment itself seems determined to stop them. Giant creatures, cliffs, thick vegetation, and unpredictable terrain make every step dangerous. The group begins to realize that finding Ann is only one part of the problem. They must also survive long enough to bring her back. Jack's determination is driven by genuine concern, but his search also puts him in situations where one mistake could cost him his life. The movie uses these dangerous encounters to show how completely different Skull Island is from the world the characters came from. Back in civilization, humans use technology and machines to control their environment. On Skull Island, nature controls everything. The humans are suddenly vulnerable, while Kong moves through the environment with confidence and power. This difference makes Kong appear almost like the true ruler of the island. Carl Denham, however, sees the island and Kong from a completely different perspective. He is fascinated by the possibility of bringing something extraordinary back to civilization. His ambition becomes stronger with every discovery. Instead of seeing Kong as a living creature with his own place in the natural world, Denham sees him as a spectacle that could make him rich and famous. This attitude becomes increasingly dangerous because Denham's desire for success has no clear limit. He is willing to take enormous risks if it means getting something that audiences have never seen before. The contrast between Denham and Ann becomes one of the film's strongest themes. Ann has begun to understand Kong emotionally, while Denham is interested in him commercially. She sees a lonely creature, while he sees an opportunity. This difference will eventually create a conflict that cannot be avoided. Kong's attachment to Ann also becomes stronger. He appears fascinated by her courage and by the way she responds to him. Ann is not simply waiting helplessly for rescue. She finds ways to survive and even discovers how to entertain Kong, creating moments of unexpected warmth in the middle of the dangerous island. These scenes allow the audience to see Kong as more than a monster. They show his personality, loneliness, curiosity, and even a sense of playfulness. This makes the eventual tragedy of his story much more emotional because the audience understands that there is a real character behind the enormous size and power. Ann also begins to recognize that Kong's world is his home. The island may be terrifying to humans, but Kong belongs there. He knows the environment, understands the dangers, and appears deeply connected to the land. Ann's growing sympathy for him makes her eventual separation from him more difficult to imagine. At the same time, she knows that she cannot remain on Skull Island forever. Her life belongs to the human world, and Jack is risking everything to bring her back. This creates a complicated emotional situation where there is no perfect solution. Jack's search eventually brings the human characters closer to Kong's territory. The tension increases because the audience knows that Kong will likely see the approaching humans as a threat. From Kong's perspective, these strangers have entered his world and are trying to take away the person he has become attached to. From Jack's perspective, he is simply trying to rescue Ann from a giant creature. Both sides have understandable motivations, which makes the conflict more emotional than a simple battle between good and evil. The movie continues building the sense that the humans do not truly understand what they have discovered. Denham believes he can control Kong, but the audience can already see that this belief is dangerous. Kong is not a prop or an animal that can easily be managed. He is an intelligent creature with instincts, emotions, and enormous physical power. Trying to capture him will inevitably create consequences. The island's other creatures also continue to remind the characters that they are far from safe. The constant danger keeps the story moving and prevents the emotional scenes from becoming disconnected from the larger adventure. Each encounter adds to the sense that the expedition is spiraling out of control. By the end of this part, the emotional connection between Ann and Kong has become much stronger. Ann no longer sees him simply as a terrifying giant ape. She sees a lonely and intelligent creature who has protected her and given her a strange sense of companionship. Kong, meanwhile, has become deeply attached to Ann and appears determined to keep her safe. Jack is moving closer to them, while Denham is preparing to turn Kong into the greatest spectacle he has ever discovered. The conflict between love, rescue, ambition, and exploitation is now becoming unavoidable. The story is approaching the point where Kong's peaceful connection with Ann will collide directly with the plans of the human expedition, and that confrontation will change everything. The story becomes more intense as Ann finds herself deeper inside the mysterious world of Skull Island, where survival depends on understanding creatures and dangers that are completely unknown to the human world. After being separated from the expedition, Ann is forced to face Kong without knowing whether the enormous ape intends to hurt her or protect her. At first, her fear is understandable because Kong is an enormous and incredibly powerful creature. His appearance alone is enough to make any person feel helpless. However, the movie gradually changes the audience's perception of him. Kong does not behave like a simple monster that wants to destroy everything around him. Instead, he watches Ann with curiosity and slowly develops an emotional attachment to her. Ann's intelligence and courage also become important because she refuses to remain completely helpless. She begins using her own abilities to survive and eventually discovers ways to communicate with Kong through gestures and trust. Their relationship develops without normal language, making their connection unusual but emotionally powerful. Kong appears fascinated by Ann because she is completely different from everything he has known on the island. She is small compared with him, fragile compared with the giant creatures around him, yet she does not behave like ordinary prey. Her courage and ability to respond to danger make Kong increasingly protective of her. This relationship becomes one of the most memorable parts of the movie because the film does not depend entirely on dialogue to communicate their emotions. Kong's expressions, movements, and reactions tell much of the story. While Ann and Kong develop their strange connection, Jack Driscoll and the remaining members of the expedition continue searching for her. Jack's determination becomes stronger because he understands that Ann is in extreme danger. However, the island makes every step of the rescue mission difficult. The environment is filled with enormous predators and dangerous landscapes that constantly threaten the group. The expedition quickly stops feeling like a movie production and becomes a desperate fight for survival. The filmmakers who originally came to Skull Island expecting adventure now realize that they have entered a world where human technology provides very little protection. One of the most impressive aspects of the movie is the scale of the island. Every environment feels enormous, from the ancient jungle to the cliffs and valleys filled with prehistoric creatures. The film creates the impression that Skull Island has been isolated from the rest of the world for thousands of years. Giant animals dominate the ecosystem, and humans are no longer at the top of the food chain. This reversal creates tension because the characters must constantly react to threats they cannot predict. Jack and his companions encounter creatures that are far larger than anything they have seen before. Their survival depends on teamwork and quick decisions, but even experienced fighters struggle against the sheer size and strength of the island's predators. These scenes also emphasize how vulnerable humans are compared with Kong. Although Kong is enormous and powerful, he understands the island better than the humans do. He knows how to move through the environment and how to fight its creatures. His strength makes him the dominant figure on Skull Island, but his emotional attachment to Ann gives him a vulnerability that other creatures do not have. Ann's connection with Kong continues to deepen as she realizes that he is capable of protecting her. Instead of seeing him only as a monster, she begins recognizing his personality. Kong can be aggressive when threatened, but he can also be surprisingly gentle with Ann. These contrasting sides make him more interesting than a traditional movie monster. He becomes a tragic character because his greatest strength cannot protect him from the human world that is about to discover him. Meanwhile, Carl Denham becomes increasingly obsessed with the possibilities surrounding Kong. His ambition grows when he realizes that the giant ape could make him famous beyond anything he has imagined. Denham does not see Kong as Ann does. Where she sees an intelligent living creature, Denham sees an extraordinary attraction and a once-in-a-lifetime business opportunity. This difference in perspective becomes one of the movie's central conflicts. Denham's ambition also reveals his willingness to take enormous risks. He is prepared to put his crew in danger because he wants to capture something spectacular for his film. His obsession with success prevents him from understanding the emotional and ethical consequences of his actions. Jack, on the other hand, becomes increasingly focused on rescuing Ann rather than achieving fame. This creates a clear contrast between the two men. Jack sees Ann as a person, while Denham sees the entire situation as an opportunity. The deeper Ann travels into Kong's world, the more she begins to understand his loneliness. Kong is powerful, but he is also isolated. He is the last of his kind and appears to have no one who truly understands him. Ann's presence gives him companionship that he has not experienced for a long time. This makes their relationship tragic because the audience begins to understand that Kong's attachment is not simply about possession. He is emotionally connected to Anne because she gives him something he has been missing: companionship. Anne also begins to feel sympathy for him, even though she knows she cannot remain on the island forever. The conflict becomes emotionally complicated because saving Anne may ultimately mean taking her away from Kong. As Jack and the others continue their dangerous search, the gap between the human world and Kong's world becomes smaller. The expedition is slowly moving toward a confrontation that will change everyone's lives. The humans want to rescue Anne, while Kong wants to protect her. Neither side fully understands the other's intentions. This creates tension because the audience can see that a direct conflict is inevitable. By the end of this part, Kong is no longer simply a mysterious creature hidden on Skull Island. He has become the emotional center of the story. Anne has begun to see his humanity, Jack is determined to bring Anne home, and Denham is preparing to exploit Kong for fame. The island continues to reveal dangerous creatures and environments, but the greatest threat may not come from the prehistoric monsters. It may come from the human desire to capture and control something that was never meant to leave its natural world. The relationship between Anne and Kong has only begun to develop, and the consequences of their connection will soon become much more dramatic. The movie begins during the Great Depression, introducing a world filled with economic hardship, uncertainty, and people struggling to survive. Carl Denham is an ambitious filmmaker who is desperate to create something extraordinary that will make his name famous. He is not satisfied with ordinary movies and dreams of discovering something that nobody has ever seen before. His determination leads him to organize an unusual expedition to a mysterious island known as Skull Island. Along with his film crew, Denham sets out on a dangerous journey without fully understanding what they are about to encounter. Among the people joining the expedition is Ann Darrow, a struggling actress who has fallen on difficult times. Anne is looking for an opportunity that could change her life, and Denham offers her a chance to appear in his ambitious movie. She accepts, hoping that the journey will give her a fresh start. Another important character is Jack Driscoll, a talented writer who becomes involved with Denham's production. Jack is initially focused on the movie itself, but his relationship with Anne gradually becomes an important part of the story. As the expedition moves towards Skull Island, the atmosphere begins to change. The mysterious destination feels completely different from the modern world they have left behind. The island is surrounded by danger and secrecy, and the people traveling there have no idea how powerful the forces waiting for them will be. When the crew finally reaches Skull Island, they discover an environment filled with massive walls, strange inhabitants, and an overwhelming sense that they have entered a place untouched by civilization. The island immediately establishes itself as a character of its own. It is beautiful in certain moments, but it is also threatening and unpredictable. The crew soon encounters the native inhabitants, whose behavior makes it clear that they do not welcome outsiders. Their appearance and rituals create an atmosphere of fear and mystery. Denham, however, remains focused on his film and continues looking for something spectacular to capture on camera. His ambition prevents him from fully understanding the danger surrounding the group. Anne becomes especially important when the natives take an interest in her. Her presence on the island puts her directly in the path of a mysterious and terrifying creature that the locals fear. The movie slowly builds anticipation before revealing Kong, making his eventual appearance feel much more powerful. Kong is not introduced simply as a monster. He is presented as an enormous, intelligent creature who rules the dangerous world of Skull Island. His size is terrifying, but his behavior also suggests intelligence and emotion. When Anne first encounters him, she is understandably terrified. Kong's presence creates one of the movie's most important contrasts. Anne represents the human world, while Kong represents the ancient and untamed world of the island. Despite the fear surrounding him, Kong is not portrayed as a mindless creature. He watches Anne carefully and appears curious about her. Their relationship becomes one of the central emotional elements of the movie. At first, Anne is simply trying to survive, but as she spends more time with Kong, she begins to understand that he is capable of emotions and attachment. Meanwhile, the members of the expedition begin searching for Anne after realizing that she has disappeared. Jack becomes particularly determined to find her. His concern for Anne pushes him into dangerous territory as he and the others explore the island. The journey exposes them to enormous creatures, deadly environments, and challenges far beyond anything they expected. The movie's adventure elements become increasingly impressive as the group moves deeper into Skull Island. Giant insects, prehistoric creatures, and massive predators make the island feel like a completely separate world. The visual effects and large-scale action help create the feeling that the characters are trapped in a forgotten prehistoric ecosystem. One of the strongest aspects of the film is the contrast between the spectacle and the emotional story. While the expedition is filled with danger and action, the relationship between Ann and Kong gives the movie a tragic emotional center. Kong may be powerful enough to defeat almost any creature on the island, but he becomes emotionally vulnerable around Ann. Ann, meanwhile, slowly discovers that the creature she initially feared has a more complicated personality than she expected. Carl Denham sees Kong very differently. Instead of viewing him as a living creature with emotions, Denham sees him as an opportunity. His ambition returns when he realizes that capturing Kong could make him incredibly famous. He begins thinking about how the giant ape could be presented to the public. This creates a major conflict because Denham's desire for fame puts Kong in danger. The movie begins showing the difference between people who want to understand Kong and people who want to exploit him. As the story progresses, Ann becomes caught between these two worlds. She has developed a strange connection with Kong, but she also belongs to the human world and has Jack searching for her. This creates emotional tension because Kong's attachment to Ann becomes stronger while the humans become increasingly determined to take her home. The island itself continues to provide spectacular challenges. Every new discovery reveals another dangerous creature or hidden location, making the expedition feel increasingly desperate. Jack and the surviving crew members must fight to stay alive while continuing their search for Ann. Their journey demonstrates how unprepared they were for the reality of Skull Island. By the end of this first part, the story has established its major conflicts clearly. Ann has entered a world where everything is larger and more dangerous than anything she has known. Kong has become fascinated by her presence, while Jack is determined to rescue her. Carl Denham sees the giant ape as the opportunity of a lifetime, setting up the danger that will eventually threaten Kong. The movie is therefore not only an adventure about a giant creature, it is also a story about ambition, survival, love, and the tragic consequences of treating something extraordinary as a spectacle. The mysterious Skull Island has only begun revealing its